True crime enthusiasts, it's Rabia Chaudhry
and Ellen Marsh.
You are invited to join us on Rabia and Ellen Solve the Case, a true crime talk show.
Grab a front row seat as we, along with our special celebrity guests, dissect our favorite true crime cases every other Thursday.
And between those episodes, join us as we talk about current true crime headlines in our About Damn Crime series.
Skip the ordinary and dive into extraordinary investigations and conversations with us.
Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform, and let's unravel these captivating stories together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 355 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
You know, you and I were talking earlier about this Ohio weather, kind of having a warm spell. It'll turn cold again, but it's like a little mini preview of the spring into summer.
Get me excited.
I know.
When I get out there and start hiking around.
It does get you excited, but then it'll go back down to like 30 degrees probably for a little while.
Then I just want to sit on my couch then.
Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Jessica Stamp.
Hey, Jessica.
Caleb DeBruin.
Well, thank you, Caleb.
Bridget.
Hey, what's going on, Bridget?
Ann O'Brien jumped out to our highest level.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Ann.
Jennifer Odell.
Hey, there's Odell.
Cowgirl 521.
What up, 521?
Ags.
Hey, Ags.
Abby Lovelace.
Well, appreciate that, Lovelace.
Benjamin Ashdown.
Hey, Ashdown.
Kathy Robinson.
What's going on, Kathy?
Mark Brockelman.
Well, thank you, Brockelman.
Darby Landon.
Hey, Landon.
And last but not least, Rebecca.
Good old Rebecca.
Good old Rebecca. And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Paul and Melissa Hipperson.
Those Hippersons.
Yeah, they've been with us a long time. We appreciate all the Patreon support. We also had a couple of great donations on PayPal. A large donation from Melinda Wargacki.
Well, thanks, Melinda. We appreciate that.
Yep, we know Melinda. We love Melinda. And one from Betty June Speth.
Well, thank you, Speth.
So we appreciate all of that. We have an episode out right now on True Crime All the Time where we're headed back to the 60s to talk about a woman named Lucille Miller and the death of her husband, Gordon Miller, burned alive in a car in San Bernardino County. Very quickly, the police looked at his wife, Lucille, as the murderer, but there's a lot to this case.
Oh, definitely has you thinking.
Yes. It's not quite as wrapped up in a nice little bow as many of the T-Cats are. There's a lot to think about. All right, buddy, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
We're talking about the murder of Eve Stratford. Eve Stratford worked at the Playboy Club in London and was featured in Mayfair magazine days before she was killed. On March 18th, 1975, Eve was attacked and murdered inside her apartment. Months later, 16-year-old Lynne Weedon was raped and murdered while walking to her home in West London. The two cases were linked by DNA over 30 years later, and some investigators have connected additional cases to these two murders, which has led to the theory that the victims were killed by an unidentified serial killer.
So interesting that they were able to tie these together.
Yeah, and we'll talk about them more in detail, but to think that after 30 years, you know, some of the dots start to get connected. There's the thought that there was this unidentified serial killer. Well, that brings hope that maybe someday that will be an identified serial killer and we'll know all about that person and what that person did. Eve Stratford was born in Dortmund, West Germany on December 28th, 1953. Eve's family moved a lot during her childhood because her father, Albert, was an army medic. They eventually settled in the town of Warrington in England. Eve moved out in 1972 to live with her boyfriend, Tony Priest. They shared a ground floor apartment with Tony's bandmates in Leighton, East London. Tony was a singer in the rock band Vineyard, originally called Onyx. They supported bands like Queen and Thin Lizzy.
Oh, I remember those bands.
Yeah, so, I mean, those were big bands. Queen was huge. So obviously they were at least on the right track, right?
Sounds like they were trending the right way.
But the band would split up by the time Eve turned 21, and Tony eventually got a job as a forklift truck driver. And I think that happens a lot. You know, bands start out, you think if you're working with a band like Queen, you're going to be signed, you're going to do something, but it doesn't always work out that way. You know, it's kind of like trying to be an actor.
Right.
You go out to Hollywood and you're waiting tables, waiting for this big break. And for some people it comes, and for others it never comes.
Or sometimes it comes and goes.
that happens as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, there's a lot of weekend bands, you know, tribute bands and things like that, that those guys, maybe they are driving a forklift during the week, and on the weekends they're doing what they wish they could have done on a larger scale.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate. But I think for a lot of people, that might just be a hobby. It sounds like they were really trying to make it as a band, and for whatever reason, it didn't work out.
I could see you trying to be in a band.
No, we've had this discussion. I have multiple guitars over here in the studio that still have yet to learn how to play.
But I can see you trying to be in a band.
I can sing a little.
Oh, you can sing.
But I don't play any instruments.
Yeah.
So. In 1973, Eve started working as a waitress at the Playboy Club in London. She was 19 years old at this time. Her dream was to be a model, and she hoped this job would help her get started in the industry. Now, I'm sure, Gibbs, that you remember these Playboy clubs. I don't think I was old enough to ever remember them.
I mean, I knew of them. I wasn't old enough to venture inside them.
Oh, I thought you were managing one at some point in the 70s. But I actually did watch, I can't remember if it was a documentary, it was some type of show about these Playboy clubs, and they had them in big cities, you know, all around. They were kind of upscale. I guess you would call them gentlemen's clubs.
They were pretty popular back then.
They were. While at work, Eve went by the name Bunny Ava. Her coworkers described her as a gentle and friendly person. She was popular with the club's regulars. She and some of the other Playboy girls were photographed with famous people who visited the club. In March 1975, Eve was suspended from the club for 3 months for breach of contract. She modeled for Mayfair magazine, a rival publication, and was featured on the cover of that month's issue. She used the name Eva Van Borks for this publication. This edition had over 460,000 subscribers.
Almost 500,000. That's a lot back then.
Yeah. So obviously it was a big deal for her. And I'm sure very hard to turn down. She didn't turn it down, but apparently it was also part of her Playboy contract that she wouldn't do it. Eve had been looking for opportunities, though, to kickstart her modeling career. She tried to model for Playboy's American magazine, but was turned down. And it was said this is why she accepted the job with Mayfair. Eve's manager and former bunny mother, Erin Morris, said Eve understood why she was suspended and wasn't upset about it. She explained that she did it because she wanted to be a model. Eve anticipated that this would be the beginning of her career, and she wouldn't need to come back to the club, although she was told she could return once her suspension was over. Erin Moore said, as quoted by The Mirror, she wasn't just going to wait on tables. She wanted to do something with her life.
And that's coming from her bunny mother.
It is. It also, I think, helps explain why she was willing to kind of breach this contract, because she thought, doesn't matter, I'm not going back there anyway, because this is going to shoot me, you know, up the ladder into, you know, some type of stardom.
Yeah, get her into the career she really wants to be and not be a cocktail waitress.
And, you know, sometimes in life, you just have to take a risk.
You do. If you want to change, you want something different, You can't keep doing the same old thing.
I know 2 guys who did that about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And so far, it's worked out pretty good.
Yeah.
Took a big risk, and hey.
Thank goodness you came up with that.
We're still doing it. Eve did 2 more photo shoots after she was suspended. One for a South African magazine and one for a crime fiction novel where she posed with a knife pointing at her throat, which doesn't seem all that strange until you learn that Eve was killed just days later. Then it seems kind of foreboding and ominous.
Well, you're right. It's definitely ominous.
And foreboding.
That too.
You left that one out. On March 18th, 1975, Eve left her apartment to go see her agent. After the meeting, she started walking home and stopped to buy herself flowers. The police believe she was followed home from the subway station in Layton. Eve left the station around 3:45 and was last seen walking alone near her apartment. She arrived home at 4:10 p.m. And this is a very scary thought to me. I mean, obviously, Eve was an attractive woman. She worked at the Playboy Club. She was, an aspiring model. The thought that someone would see her, and I don't know if become fixated is the right term, but make the decision that I'm going to follow her and do something to her. That is so scary. This is not someone who, has made a plan or has been making a plan for 6 months that they're going to eliminate a rival or something like that. Not that any of that's good. This is like a split second thing where you see someone and you make the decision, a predator makes the decision that this is a person they're going to go after. They're going to target. That it can happen that quickly, I guess, is what scares me.
Sure, yeah, that they decide that I'm going to stalk this person.
Because someone catches their eye for whatever reason.
I mean, they see her, they're attracted to her, then they want to stalk her and then take it to another level after that.
Detectives believe the killer entered the house as she opened the front door, or they knocked and Eve opened the door willingly. It appeared that the killer grabbed her soon after she got home because she dropped her flowers in the hallway. And I could see how police would make that assumption. She's not going to buy these flowers, get home, and as she's walking inside the house, just drop them in the hallway.
No, that's not going to happen.
She's going to take them to the kitchen or wherever, maybe grab a vase, put some water. I mean, that's what most people would do, but it seems like she never got the chance to do that. Around 5:15 p.m., Eve's neighbor heard a man and a woman talking inside the apartment. It didn't sound like an argument, but the conversation was followed by a loud thud that sounded like a chair falling over. The neighbor then heard footsteps walking downstairs to exit the apartment. And this is something that we've talked about in Unsolved Cases quite a bit, especially if you're in an apartment setting. You have neighbors who are, basically butting up right next to you. You're sharing a wall with them, a ceiling with them, or whatever. And so people are hearing noises. But what are they making of those noises? And what would you make of a noise like that? If it sounded like a chair falling over, would you rush over? Would you call 911? And I don't think most people would.
No.
Especially if it didn't sound like there was some kind of heated argument. You didn't hear a scream or anything like that.
I would just think, neighbors are making some too much damn noise again.
Because most people don't want to be put in that situation where, they ultimately find out they've called for no reason.
Right, exactly.
And so I think a lot of people would err on the side of not calling. I really do. Now, if you heard a blood curdling scream, you heard a gunshot, that would be different. Eve's boyfriend, Tony, came home about 10 minutes later and found her body in the bedroom. A nylon stocking was tied around one ankle and a scarf was tied around her hands. Her throat had been cut a dozen times. And we've heard this before, but it was said that her injuries were so severe that her head was almost completely severed. Authorities believe Eve was sexually assaulted because she was found partially unclothed, and semen was obtained from vaginal swabs, which indicated intercourse occurred shortly before she died. A DNA sample was also collected from a piece of Eve's clothing.
Well, I think it's safe to say she was sexually assaulted.
Yeah, based on what we know, it also sounds like they were able to collect a pretty good amount of evidence.
Yeah.
Semen. Now, we said a DNA sample. Obviously, in 1975, they didn't know what DNA was, but they collected something from a piece of her clothing that would be today considered a DNA sample. There were no signs of forced entry and no murder weapon. Detectives speculated she might have known her attacker. And I think this comes up often when there's no forced entry. But I don't think that assumption is always correct. It can't always be correct, because if somebody knocks on your door, are you going to answer? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe you look through the peephole. You don't know who the person is, but you decide you're going to answer anyway. And that person kind of bum rushes you and is able to get inside quickly and shut the door.
Or they follow you up to the door when you come home and you get in, you see them coming, you try to close the door quick enough to try to lock it, but they
are able to get in. So there wouldn't technically be forced entry, even though it was a forced entry.
Yeah.
There'd be no signs of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Because you didn't get a chance to throw the lock.
Yeah. Eve's father, Albert, was on a work trip in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. His employer sent him a message that Eve was injured in an accident and he needed to come home immediately. His company sent a car to take him to the airport. On the front seat, he found the newspaper with a story about his daughter's murder on the front page. He later found out it was put there deliberately because nobody within the company knew how to break the news to him.
It would be tough to break that news.
But it seems like a crappy way to do it.
Really cold.
But I understand. Nobody wants to deliver that type of news. But to tell a person that, their daughter was in an accident when you already know that they're dead, they were murdered, and then to kind of plant this newspaper.
Yeah.
So that the person finds out that way, it's kind of cowardly.
I think so. I think somebody at the company should have stood up.
Had the nerve to do what should have been done. Yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes you got to do the hard thing because it's the right thing. Albert spoke to the Times in 2009 and said his wife, Liza, never recovered after Eve's death. She visited her grave every day and turned their home into a shrine to Eve. She had to quit her dress shop business because she couldn't handle seeing all the young women that came in. She died suddenly in 1986, and he believed it was due to her stress and trauma. Albert said he burned all photos of Eve except for one.
It's tough.
It's absolutely tough. It's heartbreaking. It's something that we do talk about, probably, don't talk about enough because we don't have the experience. But when you read or hear things like this, you do get a sense of it. You can never fully put yourself in a person's shoes until something like that has happened to you, but you get a really good sense of what they went through.
Yeah.
The original investigative team worked based on the theory that the killer had sexual obsessions of tying women up and had read the article in the latest issue of Mayfair magazine, which featured an interview with Eve where she talked about her sexual preferences.
Yeah, maybe that is how he found out. It ignited something in him. He sought her out, and we know what happened after that.
So if this theory is correct, then there would have been a little bit more planning, right? Than just seeing Eve at the subway station. This would have been more of seeing her in the magazine, reading the article, maybe becoming, infatuated with her through that interaction. And then following her, figuring out her pattern, her routine and, finding a time to strike.
So now at least that narrows the potential suspect list, but not by a big number, right? I mean, they have a subscription base of almost 500,000.
Yeah, but you don't know who's buying it at a newsstand.
Well, that's true.
So I would narrow it, but I don't know how you could narrow it specifically, if that makes sense.
And I guess it depends if it's a regional magazine or where's this being shipped to. Maybe if you just concentrate on the people that have a subscription that live in London. And then, like you said, you still have the newsstand buyers.
David Brenner, the editor of Mayfair, was one of the men who was questioned. He said he interviewed Eve over the phone and was later cleared after he provided a DNA sample. And obviously we'll get into talking about DNA, but this clearing would have happened many, many years later because we're still many years away from being able to use DNA. Another potential suspect was a man named Abdul Kawaha, a Lebanese businessman who ate lunch at the Playboy Club every day. He enjoyed talking to the girls at the club, but especially Eve. He was devastated by Eve's murder and deeply upset that he was a suspect. He complained to one worker that the police were following him and telling his friends he was a suspect. He too was cleared after his son provided a DNA sample. So again, we're talking about what? The 70s here.
Right.
We know this DNA stuff is not going to happen for many, many years. So these people that we're talking about right now would have walked around under a cloud of suspicion for many, many years.
Yeah. And obviously he must not have been around anymore because the son had to provide a DNA sample to clear his dad's name.
Initially, the police believed that Eve's flower bouquet, which was found in the hallway, was a key piece of evidence because similar flowers were used for her Mayfair photo shoot. The police later learned that she purchased those flowers herself as well. Detectives still placed great significance on the magazine, which they believed enticed the killer, who possibly found Eve's address and stalked her. And I really don't think this is a bad lead theory. I'm not saying it's the only one, but you could see why the police would work on it or work from it. I don't know what else they had to go on. The interview was pretty recent, right? The issue was recent.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at somebody that read the interview, seen the photo shoot, maybe somebody at the club. I mean, those should be like your major points of interest to investigate out of the block. And I'm wondering, did they ever look into the flower store too? I mean, if she's been there a few times, maybe she got somebody's attention there.
No, it's a good point. I didn't see anything in the research about that. Detectives searched the area around Eve's apartment, and they found a torn copy of the magazine featuring Eve. And they also found other pornographic magazines in the same place. Eve had previously complained about a man following her, but the only description investigators had was that he had a strained and stiff walk.
Strained and stiff.
So either he was really excited at the time someone saw him, or he had an issue with his legs or his gait or, something like that.
Yeah, very strange.
Investigators learned that other young women working at the club received obscene phone calls leading up to Eve's murder. One woman reported that she received death threats after she was featured in Mayfair.
Yeah, I don't think it's strange that they're getting obscene phone calls at that time. I think there was probably a lot of perverts that visited the club,
read the magazine, looked at the magazine.
Yeah.
As opposed to the perverts of today, or
well, they didn't have the internet back then to do that, so they would just call people up on the phone and
the technology. And you and I have talked about that before. In the 1970s, not as easy to figure out who was calling you, right? Today, it is much easier. Now, people can block numbers. They can use fake numbers. There's ways to get around it. But I do believe there are probably less obscene phone calls today than there were back then.
I think it would be hard to pull off an obscene phone call today.
It's harder.
Yeah.
It's harder, I'm sure.
But the one girl gets a death threat call. I'm not surprised by that too. That maybe someone saw her in the magazine and said, it's not something good for you to do. And I'm going to call and let you know.
That's obscene.
Yeah.
So now, you could delve into an area of someone who was not aroused by these women, but maybe upset with these women for what they were doing.
Took issue with their morals?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think you can't rule it out. Eve had also received several harassing phone calls before she died. The caller hung up without speaking or whispered obscenities to her. Eve received 3 phone calls on the day of the murder. Every time she answered, the caller didn't speak and ended the call.
So either they were too afraid to talk or they just wanted to hear her voice.
But either way, that would be a very scary thing, right? You don't know what the intentions are of the person on the other end of that line. Why are you doing this to me? Now, it's obviously much more ominous because we know she was killed later that day.
Yeah, could it be somebody that has a crush on her and they're afraid to talk because they get nervous? Maybe, but kind of unlikely.
Well, 3 times is a lot.
That is a lot.
In one day. I could see somebody maybe, you want to ask somebody out, you make the call and you chicken out.
Yeah.
And decide that you just can't do it and you hang up the phone. I don't think you're going to call back 2 more times, and you're certainly not going to whisper obscenities.
No, that's true.
In that scenario.
Yeah, that's not going to get you the date. Well,
most likely.
Right.
That would never work. Several women reported that their job could be dangerous. One young woman told the Sunday People that she was raped after leaving the London Playboy Club in November 1974. Another woman was assaulted near the club, and during the assault, a woman in a car screamed, "Kill her, kill her." So again, I think, this theory of people being upset about what some of these young women were doing, you can't just discount it completely because there are things here that kind of back it up. What kind of woman sees another woman being assaulted and screams, "Kill her, kill her," unless she knows what that woman does for a living and believes that
it's so bad.
It's so bad that she's not worthy of being alive, or it's okay to assault her. The police wanted to question all 240 women at the club about previous attacks to build a list of suspects.
That's smart.
Yeah, I think it is. 6 months later, a teenage girl was killed in West London, but it would take over 30 years for her case to be linked to Eve's. On September 3rd, 1975, 16-year-old Lynne Weedon was raped and murdered while walking home in Hounslow, West London. Lynne went out with her friends that night. She took the bus to meet them around 7:15 p.m. Her parents expected her to get back around 11:30, but Lynne never came home. They went to sleep and assumed she missed the last bus.
See, that's where me and you are a little different. I don't think we would have went to sleep.
Yeah, and again, I always hate to kind of badmouth the parents of a murdered victim. It's really hard to do. So what I will say is I agree with you, because I was in this situation many times with both my kids. I just chose not to go to sleep until I knew for a fact they were home.
Yeah.
It's just what I always did. Now, my wife would go to sleep, but she had to get up much earlier than I did, and she knew that I was going to stay up. So Lynne and her friends went out to a pub in Hounslow and left at 10:30. Lynne left the group at a junction and started walking her normal route home. She was walking along Great West Point Road and took a shortcut through an alley called the Short Hedges. Detectives believed she was followed on foot and attacked in the alley, which was just 50 yards from her home, according to the paper The Evening Standard. This led the police to theorize that the killer was a local or someone who knew the area very well. Lynne was hit on the head with a heavy blunt object. The killer then threw her over a fence into the grounds of an electricity substation and raped her. Around 7:30 a.m. on September 4th, the daughter of a school caretaker whose house overlooked the substation found Lynne. She was unconscious and seriously injured. Lynne had 2 skull fractures, facial lacerations, and was experiencing hypothermia. She had been outside for over 7 hours.
Wow, long time.
Lynne never regained consciousness. She died at the West Middlesex Hospital on September 10th. Her cause of death was determined to be a brain hemorrhage. No murder weapon was ever found at the crime scene. So, again, this was a very brutal rape and murder. 2 skull fractures, lacerations to her face, and then, essentially just left to die.
But I can see the thought behind thinking that it's somebody local, knowing the streets, knowing maybe where that substation was.
The alley, the shortcut, the short hedges. Yeah, I could see that. Now, could it be that this person just followed her?
Absolutely.
On her way home from, being out? That's possible as well. Around the time of the murder, the man was out walking his dog and saw a man walking down the alley where Lynne was attacked. Other witnesses reported seeing a man running across the road into the alleyway. It's believed that this unidentified man was the killer. In October 1975, the Liverpool police found newspaper reports about Eve's murder smeared with lipstick in an empty apartment. There were also photos of Eve that looked like they had been stabbed with a dart. A landlord found them while cleaning up after 2 male tenants moved out.
It's a little strange, but is it that strange?
I think it's pretty strange. I got to be honest with you. Now, could it be that, these photos came out of a magazine and they just needed something to throw the darts at? I guess so, but it does seem as though maybe somebody had an issue with her.
Yeah, maybe she rejected him or them at one time.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that they were killers, but it seems like they had an issue. By 1976, all leads in Eve's case were exhausted. Over the years, the murders of Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon have been linked to other cases, like the 1977 murder of Elizabeth Perevincina, which occurred just 1 mile away from where Lynne was attacked. She was killed under similar circumstances, and detectives immediately speculated the 2 murders were connected. On September 9th, 1977, 27-year-old Elizabeth Perevincina was attacked and murdered while walking home alone. Like Lynne, Elizabeth was walking home late at night along Great West Road. She was attacked from behind. When she turned onto Osterley Road, the killer hit her on the head with a blunt object and dragged her into some shrubbery. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Detectives believed the attacker was disturbed before he could rape Elizabeth and fled. And that's always a possibility. And I do think this is something to talk about. The fact that a victim is not sexually assaulted doesn't necessarily mean that the murderer didn't have designs on doing that. They could have been disturbed. Somebody could have driven by. They were afraid of getting caught. And so they weren't able to do everything they wanted to do. And I guess, what that leads me into is comparing cases.
Yeah.
So if you have someone who's murdered and sexually assaulted, and then you have a subsequent murder, but there is no sexual assault, I don't think you can automatically say that the 2 aren't related or connected because they have different components or they don't have the same components. Because the police could be right here.
It could be.
It's not like this perpetrator took Elizabeth to a secluded location or back to, some house.
Right.
Where he could have complete privacy. He's like on the side of the road in some shrubs. So it's not inconceivable that somebody could have been walking their dog or, driving by and he got scared.
You just can't discount it.
No, I don't think you can. In 1983, the public learned that detectives interviewed an imprisoned police officer as part of an inquiry into the murders of Eve Stratford, Lynne Weedon, and Elizabeth Perevincina. Officer Paul Thomas was jailed for over 5 years for sex crimes and had a history of targeting schoolgirls. He also had a history of harassing women with anonymous phone calls. However, he had an alibi for the time of Elizabeth's murder. Another case that has been connected to Eve Stratford is the 1979 murder of Linda Farrow, who was murdered inside her home. She lived only about 5 miles from Eve. Linda was a 29-year-old mother of 2. She was 4 months pregnant with her third child when she died. Linda worked as a croupier, a person who manages a gambling table at an establishment in the West End of London. She was stabbed to death on January 19th, 1979, as she came home from her shift. According to the Mirror, Linda heard the phone ring and went inside, forgetting to shut the door behind her. 2 girls passing by heard a woman shriek and saw the front door slam. The killer cut her throat with a knife. Like Eve, her wounds were so severe that her head was almost severed.
Maybe this perpetrator was in the West End, visited the Playboy club, and also visited this gambling establishment.
Yeah, and it's very possible, and at those 2 places, saw Eve, saw Linda, and decided to target them. But I want to go back to, these 2 girls passing by, hearing a woman shriek and then the front door slamming. And that same question kind of comes up. What do you do with that information? What does it mean to you? Could it mean that somebody dropped a glass and cried out because they were upset? Or, I don't know. It depends on what the shriek sounded like to me.
Right.
Because there are different types of shriek. There's the, oh my gosh, I'm about to die shriek. And there's there's the surprise shriek. And again, we don't know how old these girls were. So
that could have made a difference.
That could make a difference of whether they would even think to go back and maybe tell an adult what they heard. And maybe they did tell an adult and the adult said, I don't know what that means. I didn't hear it. I don't want to get involved.
Or by the time they told the adults, maybe she was already discovered. And so there was no reason for them to do anything besides the fact tell the police, oh yeah, my daughters walked by and heard.
Yeah, that's a possibility as well. Because unfortunately, Linda's 8 and 11-year-old daughters came home from school around 20 minutes later. And it's believed that the killer was still in the house at this point and escaped out the back door. The girls peeked through the letterbox and saw Linda's body in the hall. So unbelievably tragic, to lose your mother. Extremely tragic to lose your mother in such a horrific way.
Yeah, and to discover the body laying in the hallway by looking through the letterbox.
Another level of tragedy.
Yeah.
The police saw footprints leading to Linda's front door, which were made by a Wellington boot. Papers from 1979 compared the case to the murder of Eve Stratford because of the method of murder and the fact that they worked in clubs in London. So you pointed out that similarity. There was also the similarity of how badly both women's throats were cut to the point that, each of their heads were almost severed. At the time, it was reported that detectives were seeking a man who was seen running near Linda's home. He was described as being in his late 30s, 5'9", with dark but graying curly hair and long sideburns below his ears. He was wearing a navy blue jacket, dark jeans, and Wellington boots. A bus driver spotted the man running and stopped because he thought he wanted to board the bus, but he just kept on running. Now, I don't do a lot of running. I think I've made that very clear. But when I did run, I definitely wasn't going out in jeans and, like a work boot. That wouldn't be most people's choice of footwear to go out jogging.
Not the proper running attire?
No, you don't see a lot of people competing in the Olympics in construction boots.
Well, that could be a new fun version of the Olympics.
Like every participant in that event has to wear a construction boot?
Yeah.
I get you.
It'd be good for the boot makers out there.
I think it could also severely jack up your feet.
Well, that's true too.
And I don't think they're made for running. Another murder that is often referenced in connection to the murders of Lynne Weedon and Eve Stratford is the murder of 14-year-old Patricia Morris. Patsy was killed less than 2.5 miles from Lynne Weedon at a nature reserve called Hounslow Heath. Patsy went missing on June 16th in 1980. She disappeared during her lunch break at Feltham Comprehensive School. Her body was found on June 18th in some undergrowth. Her clothing had been pushed up, but there was no additional evidence of sexual assault. Patsy was tied up in a similar manner to Eve Stratford. A pair of tights with a missing leg was tied around her leg and wound up until it knotted around her neck. Her hands were tied behind her back with the leg of her tights, and another leg was tied around her ankle.
Kind of complex there.
Yeah, but you can see why police are drawing similarities. The slashing of throats in some cases, the tying up using, tights, pantyhose, whatever in other cases. In 2004, the London Metropolitan Police's Murder Review Group reopened Lynne Weedon's case and conducted new DNA testing. In July 2006, her murder was linked to the murder of Eve Stratford based on a DNA sample obtained from Eve's dressing gown cord and her ankle binding. So we mentioned DNA earlier on, but had to say it would be many, many years before, the authorities actually knew what DNA was and before they could use it. It sounds like they did a pretty good job of collecting and storing evidence.
Yeah, did a great job preserving it.
To the point where, they were able to use it 30 plus years later. But even Lynne didn't know each other. So, I think that just even furthered the police's belief that their cases were connected. Very unlikely that they somehow would have transferred DNA between the two of them.
So after all this time, they finally are able to connect the cases, and they actually have something to work with.
Based on the evidence in both cases, the police obtained a list of 16 suspects.
That's a good list, I think.
I think it is. After all those years, Eve's case was reopened in 2007 in response to the unexpected DNA connection. Additionally, investigators took DNA evidence from the Linda Farrow case and uploaded it to the national database in 2007. Her murder was not linked to Eve Stratford or any other cases. In April 2008, a man walked into the Norfolk Police Department and confessed to the murder of Patsy Morris. He was charged and released on bail. It was later reported that he was mentally ill and the charges were dropped. Later that year, it was reported that Patsy had a potential connection to serial killer Levi Belfield. That year, Belfield was convicted of 2 murders and attempted murder. In 2011, he was convicted of murdering a schoolgirl, and he's a suspect in several unsolved crimes. Belfield lived near the Patsy Morris crime scene. Now, he would have only been 12 years old when Patsy was killed, but he did receive his first conviction for burglary at the age of 13. So is it inconceivable? No. We've seen people kill at very young ages.
Sure have.
You know, he was known for his truancy in school, and he did frequent Hounslow Heath when he should have been in class. And it was known that he did not attend school on the day of Patsy's murder. I mean, 12 years old seems really young, but we've seen it before.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
Some sources reported that he and Patsy were classmates, but the police later established that he was enrolled at a different school when she was murdered and did not move to her school until after she died. However, he reportedly bragged to a cellmate that he did murder Patsy when he was only 12 years old.
And you got to ask why, unless he actually really did it.
Yeah, but if he's already caught, he knows he's never getting out. Maybe he's just trying to puff himself up, get some more cred. Who knows? Once the media reported this information, Patsy's father, George, revealed that after she was killed, he received a death threat over the phone from an unidentified boy. He thought he sounded like a local. Bellfield's former partners mentioned that he hated blondes and targeted them as victims. Patsy Morris was blonde.
I mean, it sounds like you can make a convincing case.
Yeah, it's circumstantial, but there's a lot of smoke there. I would definitely say that. Obviously, he was a very bad guy.
For sure.
Now, could he have killed or began his, killing at the age of 12? Absolutely, he could have. Most killers don't start that early, but
some do.
Some do. Another potential suspect was serial killer Peter Tobin, who was sentenced for rape and murder in 2006. We covered him, right?
Yep.
On TCAT? I thought we did. The police found the bodies of two girls who went missing in 1991 at his home in Kent. Tobin previously served 14 years in prison for a double rape conviction and was in London when Patsy was murdered. Tobin died in 2022.
He was a bad dude.
Yeah, he was. But this is natural, right? If you have a known killer or serial killer who operated or was in the location around the time of these murders, that person is going to be looked at.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if, the victim fits kind of their MO, their profile, something like that. And if there's any type of connection, you look at this Levi Belfield, well, he lived really close to the Patsy Morris crime scene. It's not like this guy lived 4 hours away.
Yeah, he was in the same neighborhood.
So pretty natural that you would at least take a look at him. Now, can you prove it was him? That's a different story. Same with Peter Tobin. He was in London. Now that's, a big city.
Sure.
So how close he was to Patsy, I don't know, but you're at least going to take a look at it. In 2015, the police issued a public appeal for information and offered a £40,000 reward. In the Eve Stratford and Lynne Weedon cases, DCI Noel McHugh told The Guardian, DNA work is complex and lengthy, and we are still following this line of inquiry. However, I firmly believe there is someone out there who has information about who carried out these murders. It's inconceivable the killer of Eve and Lynne has kept the perfect secret for 40 years. It's a heavy burden to carry, and he must have let details slip over the years, maybe to a partner, a friend, even a cellmate. And I would appeal to anyone with information to contact us. He went on to say, the man who carried out these murders is now of a different, older generation. I would imagine he must have reflected upon his actions every day over the past 40 years. So this is an interesting subject to me. You have someone who kills one or multiple people at an early age. I don't know if it's 12, but let's say it's 18, 19, 20, and 40 years goes by. Now they're 60 years old. People change a lot from 18 to 60. Does this person feel a lot differently today, if they're still alive, about what they did. Now, I don't know that the self-preservation thing changes all that much. Nobody really wants to go to prison for the rest of their life. So, this one investigator said, well, he kept the perfect secret. To me, if you're a lone killer, I don't see why you would ever tell anyone what you've done.
Yeah, because there's no reason to.
There's no benefit. I get it. It's a heavy burden, but there's no benefit in telling anyone. There's only a very, very big downside, which is that person could rat you out, and the next thing you know, you're never seeing daylight again. Some have speculated that the women could be victims of Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper. We did him as well, and man, he was a nasty guy too.
He was.
Sutcliffe died from COVID in November of 2020. He was convicted of 13 murders and 7 attempted murders, and the police suspect that he's involved in at least 30 unsolved murders, according to the Mirror.
I think he's one that it's easy to try to box these unsolveds.
Oh, yeah, because he was such a bad guy, and he did have a high number of known murders and even a higher number of murders that it's thought he could be connected to. So, yeah, if something happened anywhere that he was around and he was active during that time, which we know he was, then he definitely is going to be someone that's brought up. What I do think is interesting is that with a lot of these guys, we did the episodes so many years ago,
right,
that they've now died.
Yeah.
And they were alive, I believe, at the time we probably did the episode. I know Peter Sutcliffe was. And I believe that Tobin was alive as well when we did the episode. A government-mandated report about the West Yorkshire Police's investigation stated that Sutcliffe was probably responsible for numerous attacks on other women between 1969 and 1980. I don't think they're going very far out on the limb on that one.
No.
I think that is a given. I think with a guy like Peter Sutcliffe, if you can pin X number of murders and assaults on him, the number that you don't know about is probably even greater. I truly believe that. According to ex-intelligence officer Chris Clark, who wrote a book titled The Secret Murders, Sutcliffe was near Eve's home for his sister-in-law's wedding, which took place 4 days after she was murdered, and her murder had the same signature as other confirmed victims. The murder of Lynne Weedon also had the same MO, and he was in London at that time as well. He visited a home in North London and took a flight from the Heathrow Airport, which was 4 miles from the crime scene. So,
making a good case for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not definitive. It doesn't prove that Sutcliffe was involved in these murders. What you know for sure is that he was capable of the murders. We know that. And now it sounds like he was at least in the area at the time that the murders took place. So I think you have to take that pretty seriously. The Mirror reported that the police have Sutcliffe's mouth swab and hair in their national database, but not a blood sample.
Not surprised that they would have that.
No,
right?
Me neither. I would think as long as it's not, completely degraded, they could get a DNA sample off of that. I'm surprised they don't already have a DNA sample.
Well, and they could. They're just keeping it under wraps.
But it's probably what it's going to take, right, at this point, to conclusively say that this person or that person committed the murders. I mean, you can talk about all the serial killers who operated in and around that area all you want. You can bring up Peter Sutcliffe, Levi Belfield, Peter Tobin, all these different people, and you could really say that all of them could have done it. They were capable of doing it, no doubt, but it could be, someone else entirely. I just think to definitively say that this person was the killer, it's going to take something in the area of DNA. And it's good because they have DNA. We know they do. But we do a lot of unsolved cases where they have DNA. And a lot of times, you think, well, okay, if you got DNA, well, you're going to be able to solve the case. But that doesn't always happen. If you can't match that DNA to someone, meaning the perpetrator's DNA is not in a database, or you can't, figure out something using like genetic genealogy, and maybe they could, and they just haven't, gone down that route yet, then you're never going to most likely solve some of these really old cases. Right. I just don't believe somebody's going to come forward at this point.
I don't think so either. They would have come forward by now.
Yes, most likely, unless the killer is still alive and there's somebody who knows who it is, but they won't come forward until that person is dead. I do think in some cases there is that possibility. Either they're afraid that this person's going to kill them.
Yeah.
Or they just want to wait until this person dies, and then they'll come forward and
make the statement or tell what they know. It's been over 40 years since the murders of Eve Stratford, Lynne Weedon, Elizabeth Perevincina, Linda Farrow, and Patsy Morris. I mean, there's a very good chance that the killer or killers, depending on what you believe, they're either dead or, they're pretty old at this point. Oh, yeah.
I would think, unless they killed when they were 12, 15, even 20, that would put them at, still maybe in their 60s.
Right.
It's not that old.
I mean, there's a chance that one or some of these could be solved.
Yeah, there's always a chance. But the further we go, to me, the more chance that time runs out before the killer dies. And then, okay, great, maybe years down the road, you solve it, you can name the killer, but you really can't do anything to them.
Right.
But even if that was the case, let's say the killer was already dead or is dead at the time they solve it, I still think it's important.
Absolutely. It gives you some type of closure.
Yeah, because there's still family members of the victims who are living, and they're living with that burning question.
Yeah.
Who did this? Why did they do it? Now they may never get the why, but they might get the who at some point, and the who might lead to the why. We don't know. It's also kind of scary how many serial killers were operating in the area.
Yeah. Alarming.
But we find the same thing here in the States. Every time we research, it's like there was 3 or 4 serial killers operating in the same area at the same time. But that's it for our episode on the murder of Eve Stratford. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Thomas calling again from Montreal, Canada. I've called before, but I just keep getting farther and farther into the podcast, and I absolutely love you guys. I want to let you know that I had a rough start to the year, and I just want to say that literally you guys and your podcast have gotten me through the last couple of months. And I'm in a much better place now. I've got a new job and I'm really, really happy. So I just want to thank you guys for, just being there for me and really, really just enjoying the podcast. So keep up the great work and keep your own time ticking, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for the very positive voicemail. We love you too. Sorry to hear that you had a rough start, but it sounds like things have turned around already.
Yeah, doing better and
so that's great.
New job. That's awesome.
Yeah. We appreciate it very much.
David, and he's like, don't ever, for any reason, do anything to anyone, for any reason, ever. All right, you're right. No one should hit anyone. Goodbye.
So I might have cut off the beginning. It was a little hard to hear. But basically, I think she was talking about something that you were saying in an episode, and what she was referring to, and I don't know if you remember, there's an episode of The Office where Michael is being asked by the big boss, like, how he's doing it. How's he making the branch so good? And he said, I have like this thing that I live by. And that's and then he just goes into this ramble.
Oh, okay.
Don't ever, under any circumstances, do anything to anyone at any time. I think, and I got a kick out of it, but I think I cut off the first part.
Now we all know.
I had to explain it, but it was funny. So appreciate that voicemail. All right, buddy. You got anything else?
No.
All right. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Pluto TV is TV the way it should be, free. With over 300 channels, thousands of movies and TV shows costing zeros of dollars. So if you want to watch shows like Ghost, The Walking Dead, CSI, Star Trek, or The Price is Right, well, The Price is Right. It's free. Hit movies like Braveheart, Sonic the Hedgehog, Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, or Mean Girls won't cost you a thing, because everything is free. All you have to do is download the app, which, by the way, is also free. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.